Hello. I think we're all on. Is this thing on?
I think so.
Seems to be.
Great. Welcome everyone to our panel. I just want to introduce everybody. So we'll talk up here for about 45 minutes, and we'll open it up to questions. We'll have a microphone where you can ask questions. I'm Whitney Dangerfield. I think I know most of you here. I'm publications director. This is Jeffrey Bloomer. He's the editorial director at Slate. He's worked at Slate for nearly 13 years and serves as a features editor and senior editor and producer. After your latest promotion, I read that you were praised for your sense of Slatiness, which I'm sure we will talk about tonight. Rachel Sonis is the editor of the Ideas section of Time magazine. Before that, she was a book editor at Penguin Random House. Her writing has appeared in Rolling Stone, Time Out New York, among other publications. And she's an alum of the journalism program here at NYU. So the first thing I wanted to ask is, we'll get into pitching. I'm just gonna move that there and everything. But you're both editors, and I think that there are some students here interested in that track. And it can be like a lot. I do get that question, like, how do you become an editor? I always talk about this zigzaggy way I became an editor. But how did you all start as an editor? When did that transition happen?
Sure. I would say my journey to becoming an editor was kind of strange just because I started as a music writer for a long time. And then around, 2015, 2016, the pivot to video happened, which I know a lot of you don't remember that time, but it was a crazy time for people in journalism. And I thought that I kind of wanted to make the transition into doing something longer. So I ended up going into book publishing for a few years and got sort of became really in love with working with writers and really piecing together different pieces and sort of realizing more and more that I loved the puzzle aspect of working with writers and on sort of a larger stage. And then a lot of my books at the time were really nonfiction, argumentative books. And so when the job at Time sort of came up, which is for the op-ed section, it seems like a really great fit for my skills. So it kind of happened at a happenstance, kismet time, but that's how I kind of got there.
Yeah, our stories are actually weirdly similar. My first job was at a music magazine in 2009, and then I was writing mostly about movies for them as it happened. And I did a lot of fact checking and that kind of thing, and just did whatever they needed, and was really actually liked that more than I thought, even more than writing. And then I worked a few other places and ended up at Slate, doing sort of helping them understand new platforms. This is when publishing to Facebook was new, and now we don't even do that anymore. So that's what they were looking for at that time. But then we started doing a lot of video also. I was lucky that I got to produce docuseries that were actually really cool and good. I have one guy I made one with for years who's still a staff writer at Slate who works under me now. And then when we decided pretty early on, around 2018, to just stop bothering trying to do video, they said, do you want to try being a senior editor? They basically handed me paper saying, you can go and here's your package, or you can try working for the culture section as an editor. Because I was big into the pitch meetings. I loved going to them and sparring with editors. I had been writing throughout and willing to do a bunch of stuff outside of my strict job. And I think that was sort of the thing that kept me there. And it turned out that was really what I should have been doing all along. So that's kind of how I ended up doing it. I think I was just lucky to be there long enough that they saw that I had different skills. And I think that'd probably be the path that most of you would follow. Maybe you'll get an associate editor job somewhere, if you're lucky, but you'll probably end up there doing something else for a little while, and then they'll realize your abilities, and you can grow that way if it ends up being the right fit for you.
When you say you're sparring with editors, I'm curious how that, because I think sometimes it can be hard when you're outside of your editor lane or whatever, if you're in a different lane, to be I have an idea. So what exactly was happening? Were you coming up with ideas, or were you pushing back against ideas, or what?
Yeah, so the way that we do ideas memos at Slate is that everyone passed a pitch, but then the pitches don't have names on them. And when we go through, you're only allowed to pick up someone else's pitch. So basically you're just like, I like this idea, here's why I like it. And then everyone fights about it before the person who pitched it talks. And at the end, that person says, this is my pitch and here's why everything you said was right or wrong, or etc. So I loved meetings like that. Some people don't respond to them as well. Some people prefer to not pitch that way, but I found it to be liberating, and I think it helped someone that they didn't really know or necessarily have confidence in sort of develop a voice, you know?
Yeah. I mean, this sort of leads to my next question that, you know, we all know about pitching and then it's like you don't hear back. And like, I know from the editor's point of view, it's like, I know how many emails you're getting. Like, I know that like you're dealing with your staff writers and your boss and you're like in the news and like, just like there's so much going on. So could you just bring us inside your publication a little bit? And I mean, I'm curious about your day and like how you spend your day, but also like you can tell, I'd love to hear about these ideas, meetings, and how you go through pitches. Because some editors just do it by themselves. Some, it's a whole thing. Some people are fighting.
For sure. So, I mean, every single day we start out with like a whole newsroom meeting where we go through every single idea and every single story that's coming out that day. Usually that is when me as an ideas editor who's not on like breaking news, I'm looking to fill in certain gaps, or if there's something that is a huge news story that kind of says something about, you know, our society or you know, feels like a pivotal moment, like that is when my sort of light bulb comes up and I'm like, okay, well, I need to, you know, find some writers who are often from my sort of standpoint. It's usually honestly freelance writers to go forth and kind of talk through or try to figure out an argument that speaks to the moment that we're in. So that really is such a big bulk of my day, apart from obviously looking at pitches, working on longer form stories, so things maybe like a year or two in advance, working with video, working with our photo team, our art team on daily stories, but also stories that are coming out in a few weeks. And honestly, a lot of planning. A lot of the times there's so much news that you can kind of plan in advance, whether that's like a new release or whether that's like something that's coming up like an election. So that's really the bulk of my day. It's a lot of planning and it's a lot of talking to people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of similar. We have a noon meeting every day where we spend 20 minutes like kind of going and making sure that we have the biggest stuff covered and then thinking about if we want more and if we have someone on staff for that or if we want to go elsewhere. And that's where relationships become really important. If the editors know who you are and know what you haven't, know about and can write about quickly, that's great for a place like Slate. It's also great if we know that we want like more long feature down the line and we know the writers who, can kind of pull out that kind of work and know about that subject matter generally. So that's kind of how we work with freelancers. I don't want to get ahead, but you sort of mentioned already about how many pitches we get and how often we respond to them. And I did want to talk about this because I think it's a good venue. I get like 150 a day and I respond to maybe 5.
I would say the same.
And it's not that I don't want to respond to more, but it's that I just like don't have time to say to every single person, like, this isn't a good fit for Slate. I try to be better about it. I used to be, but then everyone eventually gets worse at it. Maybe you respond to all of them.
I try to respond to a lot of them. It's certainly not within like 24 hours time, but we do get quite a bit of influx of different stories. And so some take a longer time to think about. And then sometimes it's just a straight up no, or sometimes it's a straight up yes. So it totally depends on the situation.
Yeah, totally.
I always felt like the yeses were easy-ish, the nos were pretty easy, and it's the maybes that stay around.
It's always
in your
the in-between, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I think, and I want to talk about, like, because I think a lot of students are like, it's silence, does that mean no, or does that mean I didn't see it? But I want to put a pin in that, and because first I wanted to talk about, what is a good piece for you? And then we can talk about, what falls into the yes, what's a good pitch for you, and then we can talk about the maybes, and I think that's where we will find out more about does silence mean no?
Yeah.
What is a good piece for a time?
Yeah, I mean, so I think for the ideas section in particular, which again is opinion, it's really about not saying, this happened, like breaking news style, but it's more about what is the thing sort of trying to say, or what is the, argument, and what is the sort of bigger societal questions that we're asking ourselves. So like a big one that, I worked on earlier this year was when Beyonce announced her country album. That was a huge moment. But then also, of course, like country radio was like not playing her, and it was like this whole hullabaloo. And so I ended up teaming up with a great culture writer named Taylor Crumpton, who ended up having so much knowledge in the space of country music, but music in general. And so she had a argument that was great, which was Beyonce has always been country. And we put that out within, 24 hours time. And we were really sort of first to ride that wave of like really kind of backing her in going down that country album. So that was like a really great, way that we've sort of used ideas to really get behind, or like, talk about like the bigger societal issues. We recently also had a piece about if everybody knows about, Prop 6 in California. It didn't go through, which is basically sort of California's prop against indentured servitude, particularly like when it comes to people that are incarcerated. So we actually worked with someone that is incarcerated within the San Quentin prison system to talk to different people that are incarcerated, to talk about, what were the miscommunication issues that were, around this bill. Why were people saying no? Why would you want to say yes to people choosing how they work and why they want to work? So those are kind of the different ways in which we kind of say yes to things.
Yeah. It's like a strong sense of why now, but also why you.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
What's the slatiness of a pitch?
Yeah, I mean, from a practical perspective, if you Google how to pitch Slate, literally a page on Slate will come up that has all the editors' names that you'll pitch, tells you exactly what we're looking for and not looking for, the common stuff, like don't pitch an idea that we ran something pretty close to 2 days ago. It's stuff like that like, it's kind of common sense, but also maybe it's not the number one thing you think. Like an editor will instantly Google your argument to see if you're saying something new. And new can mean a lot of things. It can mean opinion, like a left-wing argument or even a right-wing argument, depending on what it is. Or it can mean you have an interesting reporting detail or something that other people haven't picked up on that really informs whatever it is that is in the conversation that day. And as far as reporting goes, it's kind of similar. It's just like you need to make sure that 5 other people haven't written the same piece. I've had it happen where I've said yes to something, and then the editorial process found reporting that made it very duplicative, and so we ended up not going with it. So those are really the biggest things that we look for with writers. And I mean, it matters a little bit who you are and your background, and like also like what you've done other places or what you can show me that you're able to do. Like that definitely matters, but your idea for us is paramount because that's what our readers respond to.
I mean, I talk to students a lot, and I'm like, it's all about your idea. But, there is a little bit of a bar if you're a new writer. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what are you thinking about when the writer is new to you and sort of, like a student maybe, or new to journalism-esque?
I would say that like the biggest thing to me is the idea of like, what kind of communities are you a part of? Like where are you going out, and where are your contacts? Where are your sources? Like what are you seeing outside that you're embedded in those communities? I think those are kind of like the biggest things that I would say when I am looking at new writers. Like what communities have you found, and what are the issues that you want to discuss? Because I think what that is the biggest thing that you can bring as a new writer is honestly like not just the ideas are paramount, but also like the communities that you're trying to uplift, the communities that you're trying to show. So that's one of the biggest things I would say off the bat.
Yeah. Can you remind me of what you were originally trying to get at?
Like what makes for a good pitch, and then also like what's the bar for a new writer? Like the idea is the most important thing, but like you also are considering to a certain extent that like, okay, maybe this person hasn't written that much or at all.
Yeah, absolutely, totally. I honestly, the opportunity to work with new writers is always exciting for me. Like, I kind of want to give people opportunities at the beginning because I remember not having any at all. I went to the University of Michigan, not exactly an unknown school, but I didn't know anyone. I had no internships when I graduated. It was not easy to get anyone to give me a chance. And so I really love to give people those chances. It's just, I have to see that if I'm going to invest time and money in you, that you have at least the building blocks of something that I can work with. Like, Slate's not a college, and so we're not necessarily there to teach, but we were very much willing to help you. So, like an example, someone who's like 2 or 3 years out of college based in Ohio emailed us a story idea about exotic animal fairs where they sell like lions and llamas and stuff to like people who want to run farms, where people can come and visit them and pay them, basically. It's not a great thing. It's very unregulated. It's like kind of like, if you think of Tiger King, it's like in that vein, right? But that kind of stuff, like, people don't realize the extent of which this trade happens. And he's like, I'm willing to go to one. I can film it. I can do all of this stuff. And so he had a couple clips in like a local Appalachia kind of magazine, but we put him on the phone with one of our best feature writers. I had my features deputy kind of walk him through exactly what goes on with stories like that. And now he's making like a pretty handsome fee to do the story. He reported it last weekend. We'll see how it goes. But we really want to work with people. So just having a great idea and being open to like people coming in and kind of telling you how to work and all of that, I think really makes a big difference for us.
I think it also like speaks to the fact that like these ideas and these stories, like, they don't happen in a vacuum, There's a whole team behind you. And oftentimes that is your editor. And that is like the person that you are supposed to talk to about your hopes, your fears about a certain piece. And that is like where the magic happens, I feel like. That even whether you're a seasoned writer, whether you write every single day, or whether you're new to this and you're learning and things like that. So,
I mean, I'm assuming that everyone sitting here is like me. I want to be that person who gets everyone behind them and like is like the new writer who's like, get you on the phone with the best feature writer and we'll teach you. So I guess what did that writer like? What put it over the top? Was it is it this, were you surprised by the idea, or like what did he say in the pitch because I think like every student in every journalism program would probably be like, me, I want to be that person that's there. So what do you think did it?
I can, maybe the most practical and easy thing I can do is I can forward you the pitch later and you can send it to anybody who wants it.
All right.
I'm sure I'll ask the writer, but I'm sure he won't mind. It was just like a combination of interesting details. And so I'm surprised that kind of thing is so unregulated still. There was, most people in this room are probably too young to remember, but there was a very bad incident 20 years ago. Yeah, where in Ohio, a man who obviously was disturbed in some way took his own life and released all of his animals first in rural Ohio. And it was like, an entire pride of tigers and like black bears and everything. And most of them were killed. The ones they didn't find, they presumed were eaten by the other animals, if I remember correctly. There's a great GQ story about this if you want to know, an example of good long-form journalism. So it just kind of was in conversation with a lot of things I sort of knew about, but kind of like couldn't believe was still happening exactly that way with like absolutely total dearth of regulation. And it's also just a huge subculture of people that's like a pretty interesting world beyond the fact that it's kind of horrifying. So I don't know, I can send the pitch. I wish I had it in front of me.
Do you have an example, Rachel, of something that you were like, the other thing we think about a lot are the pitches, and I know I'm going off my script here a little bit, but what makes for an actually, like, what are you looking for in a pitch? So how do you write a pitch?
So I think for us, or for me in particular, because we get so many pitches, I think one of the biggest things to pay attention to in just brass tacks terms is your headline. What is the catchiest thing that you can possibly say? And that is usually, and I was talking about this earlier with some colleagues, it's really the thing that you will say in your group chat. Like, it is truly very much like, how would you explain to friends what is happening? And like, how will you get their attention? That is exactly like what we would like to hear about. I think that's the main thing. I think for me in particular, as someone that works in opinions in particular, it's really thinking about like what your argument is versus like what the problem is. It's like really like what is the argument that you are trying to put forth, and also what kind of research are you going to use to really, really back up that kind of story. So that can be either like a reported op-ed or just a straight up opinion piece. But that often is like the thing that kind of makes or breaks things. I think oftentimes because there is such limited time, a succinct paragraph is really like the greatest thing that you can possibly do. I think if you've written the piece already, always good to send it just to get a sense of your like writing style. But I think those are kind of like the big things that I look for. It really does start with the headline.
Yeah, I can second all of those tips. Write a headline. Maybe don't put in the email, here's what this piece will be headline. Instead, just make it your subject line.
Yeah.
That's like a thing that's helpful. Even if you write through the piece, definitely do the paragraph. I'm not going to look at the whole piece unless I like the paragraph. You know what I mean? I'm going to read a couple sentences real quick. Those are like just in terms of the practical things. Those couple links to things you've done, even if it's just in a student publication. Not just, but it would be helpful to get a sense of your writing style. But those are the biggest things for us too.
Yeah, and I think, and the other thing, wow, I lost my train of thought there. But I think the main thing is also like, thinking about like the different ways that you can really show how it can sort of like look to a general readership. I think that is the main thing as well. I mean, I think it's also really just about reading the publication that like you are pitching to. That's such an obvious thing to say. But I think oftentimes like that is one of the biggest things, get a sense of their writing style, get the sense of the things that they're already putting up and the kind of people that they work with, and then like see, oh yeah, like this, how can I fit into that space?
Well, I was always surprised by how like even the most seasoned writers, you're like, I don't think they read this section at all. Like and they'll like pitch you something that you'd already run or whatever. You're like, we would never run a Q&A. We would never run a Q&A this whole time. And so like sometimes the obvious things are helpful to hear for our students to hear. And like I guess sometimes I don't always tell students to put, if they've written their piece, to put it in, to be like, and here's my piece, it's attached. Just because I feel like editors do want to have some say in, I mean, it's different if it's like a personal essay or something that really depends on the execution of it. But
yeah, but I think on the other hand, all of this stuff is moldable. It's always still, like kind of a blank canvas, even though I know that there is already a piece. There are already like, at least if you think about it in like, making clothes, it's like there's still like patches and like you can still morph it into something. And that's like the work of the editor really, right? Is to like really work with you in tandem to really make it the greatest it can be.
Yeah, every editor is different too, which is part of what makes this so frustrating for new freelancers.
Yeah.
But I definitely prefer you to send me a paragraph of an idea that's in development than to send me a completed piece. That's my preference. And I'm more likely to respond positively if it's something about something that's going on right now, or it's an essay you adapted from something you wrote in a class. Like in those cases, sure, send it. But if it's, I'm just purely speaking from preference of me and probably most of my colleagues, I usually respond more positively to that. But you have an example right here of somebody who doesn't necessarily. So,
yeah. That is one of the frustrating parts, I feel like.
Well, and also when you find an editor that you really connect with, that like makes it so then you continue that relationship. Yeah. So we've been talking about some of the common pitfalls, but can we talk about that a little bit more? Like if somebody hasn't read your section, or maybe they like the headline, if you haven't included a headline, or at least something that's like headline-esque in the subject line. Is there anything else that you're like, oh, stop doing this in the pitches?
Getting my name wrong or the publication wrong is probably an ultimate delete. I feel like you should know who you're sort of sending things out to. I think that is like a really big part of it. I think just being as sort of succinct and as possible um, in your like email in general, I think is like one of the biggest things that you can do. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I could go down a list of things, but like, don't call your idea timely unless it needs to be published in the next week. If you do that and I open it and it's not timely, I'm like, oh my God, don't do this to me. But yeah, succinct, clear, quick pitches that like get right at the core of your idea. You don't have to know everything about your piece already. Just, I'm interested in this. I have this theory or this argument. Here's what I have so far. Here's what I want to do to get more. That's always helpful to see a sense that you have a plan, but you don't have to be all ready. It's easier to put everything in the body of an email rather than an attachment, even if it's a Google Doc. I'd rather just look at an email, subject line with a quick sort of succinct description of what the piece's argument or angle is really helpful. Other than that, like, yeah, just not writing super long, very brief bio is always good just to know who you are, even if you're just starting out.
Well, we had one panel, I mean, it was an editor from the New Yorker, and he's like, I love a long pitch. And I was like, he's probably the only one.
He's an editor for the New Yorker.
Right, exactly. But I was almost like, don't say that, don't say that.
Yeah.
So say you found a good pitch, like walk us through what happens after that, because that part of it is just as important as the idea.
Yeah, I think ultimately, I guess it depends on what it is and how timely it is. If it truly, like Jeff said, like if it needs to be published in 24 hours to, 2 days, then we work much faster than normal. I usually, you work with quite a few colleagues to get a few different reads just to make sure that what I'm not seeing, maybe somebody else with different expertise is seeing. We often work with our art department to see like, oh well, like could there be an illustration that's paired with this? Could there be even like some photo work that could be paired with this? Especially if there is something that feels like it has a much longer lead time. Like that's always really great because then we can, get other departments more involved than usual. And we can make it into kind of like a bigger thing, which is always really great. That's kind of how it sort of envelops from there for me.
And are you able to say yes just yourself, or do you need to bring it to the pitch meeting?
Yes, mostly. I mean, I think that we are a small team, and so then we tend to work really, really fast. But I do think that if there are pieces that are, very, very delicate, or if there's something that is like being discussed that is like a hugely delicate subject matter, then it's like, of course, other people need to read it. Other people need to know about it. If we need to get, our legal team involved, if we need to get, other people involved into getting as many eyes on it as possible to make sure that it is airtight. And then, of course, to like protect the writer at all costs, like we will do that.
Yeah, it's pretty much similar. Almost anywhere you guys are going to pitch now is a pretty small team, even places that used to be huge. So we're always in communication with each other. I'm able to say yes. If I'm spending more than like $5,000 or something on a feature, I usually talk to someone about it first, just to make sure that someone else sees what I see. If it's just a straightforward essay that's 500 words responding to the news or 1,000 words, then sure. But I think the number one thing I would do if I were you is like be very clear about deadline, be very clear about fee, without, I hate to use the word pushy, but sound like you're just like, hey, like I'm so glad that you're interested. Like, does this fee work or how does that work, and get a contract? That ends up being a problem for us sometimes. Sometimes it's been that writers think that it's a definite yes, but we're like, no, we want to hear more. And then they're like, when it doesn't work, they want a kill fee and they didn't contract for one, and that's not really, it's just protect yourself in the beginning. Make sure that we're very clear about what's going to happen if it doesn't work, what actually is being said yes to. I'm giving you the nitty gritty, like kind of part of it. Yeah. But in terms of what happens with us is you file the piece, one person probably will edit it. If it is on a topic that is very tricky or complicated in some way, typically someone else who knows about that topic will be asked to read it also. And it really depends if you're doing news response or an essay or whatever, kind of how long it will take. If it's a long feature, it'll probably be a few months, depending on what it is.
do all of the ideas go, do you still do the thing where you have like your ideas and everyone's sort of like talking about it in a Google Doc? Is that still
We
a
don't
thing?
do that with freelance. We stopped doing it with freelance pitches because the freelancers can't come to defend themselves. So we realized that we were knocking down these ideas without asking the most important person.
So you do it for staff?
That's only staff. Or sometimes regular contributors will come to the office, but we wouldn't ask like a random person to pitch us and come in because it's, I don't know.
Yeah.
It would be a tough process.
So it is just sort of an individual editor being like, I think we should go with this.
Typically, like, I oversee the culture and the life editors and the long form people. So the culture people might like be like, this looks expensive. What do you think? And like 5 people will be copied on the email, and usually 2 or 3 people will weigh in. Typically, if there's some promise, it will at least go to a group of people. Often freelancers don't wait for that and just pitch a bunch of people, so that happens regardless.
Well, since you brought that up, I do want to ask like the multiple submissions thing. So when I was an editor, like, you know, like I was like, you should really just pitch one at a time, because when I was an editor, if I got something and I remember one time I like brought it to my boss and then I said yes, and then they're like, oh, actually it ran over, it's going to go over to this other publication. And I was like, okay, but I just spent like the day, like, I don't know, doing things with it. And so I'm sort of coming from that point of view, but then I've been with other editors on panels, and they've been like, nope, it's hard out there. Like multiple submissions are totally fine with me, and then I get FOMO if I didn't get it. So I'm curious what you guys, how you feel about it.
Yeah, I think just be transparent. Like there's no harm, no foul on that end. Like if you're just saying, you know, like I'm submitting to multiple people, if it's very, very timely, aka it needs to be up because there's a breaking news event, it needs to be up like tomorrow, then say, you know, like I need to know by this certain amount of time, or else I'm gonna, you know, move on to somebody else. Or you can say I'm already like pitching to multiple people at once. I say like when you're starting out and when you feel like you're still making your network and you're still, you know, finding the contacts and the editors that you like and all of those different things, then like I think the more the merrier. It's a game of like musical chairs. It's just about like getting as much asses in seats as possible.
Yeah, I think that's basically how I feel too. It's okay to submit multiple places. Tell me you're doing it. And if it's really not an idea that needs to run tomorrow and you really think it would have a good home at Slate, maybe let us have a week to respond, but you don't have to. I'm not going to hold it against you. I might be even more likely to respond quickly depending on how much I like the idea. I often, though, do appreciate somebody who like really knows that this would be a good home for their piece and wants to make it work, especially if it's not, you know, it's a long feature that can go up in 6 months. It's nice to have that, but I don't require it, certainly. That's what it will say on the Slate submission page.
And since we're like still on this topic, because everyone's always like, I sent the email, I didn't hear anything back. How long should I wait till I follow up? And I usually say a week, follow up, then wait a little bit, then follow up, then move on. But
I would say that would be like the rule of thumb that I would probably put, especially if it just totally depends on like what the story is and like what it's responding to, what it's on. If there is like a timely aspect of that, obviously like we would want to respond sooner. But if it is a more, you know, like evergreen, if it's something that we can take our time on, usually a week is a great barometer. Yeah.
Seconded.
So then, okay, so it's been a week and you haven't heard anything. You follow up, you haven't heard anything. Does that mean it's a no?
Sometimes no. Like sometimes it really, for me, like it sounds like you disagree. Sometimes it really just means the inbox is really full. And sometimes like I know that how frustrating, God, I know how frustrating that sounds. But sometimes it just truly is about persistence. And like, I am one of those people that is not like troubled by the fact that like people are following up or something. Like, I know it is totally your job to do that. And it's totally my job to like respond in hopefully what is a timely fashion. Sometimes things get in the way, big news events get in the way, life gets in the way. And I think that is kind of the main thing. So sometimes silence actually doesn't mean... It just means that I haven't gotten to it yet.
Yeah, or it means that I saw it, looked at it quickly, and thought, and put a Gmail star on it, the Gmail star of death. If I'm going to be completely honest with this crowd, that's what happened with that piece that I told you about, the one in Ohio. And the writer followed up with me twice, and finally I asked another editor to look at it because I was like, I'm never gonna fucking get to this. Sorry. And then she did, and she's the one who commissioned it finally. But I saw the promise in the pitch. Didn't have time to really look at the guys more closely, figure out if it was gonna work. So it's okay to follow up as long as you're doing it, obviously, like in a polite way. It doesn't bother anyone. Everyone has Gmail anyway. I think the emails get grouped. It's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing is like, I mean, we've all been on the other side, right? Like where like you're like send a thing out and you're like check mail, check mail, check mail, check mail, and like your inbox is just getting filled up. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of times students are like, oh, I don't know, should I follow? Should I? Like, I don't want to feel like I'm pushy, and I'm like, don't, just follow up.
Yeah, I don't think there's no, like definitely don't, I would say that don't follow up every day, but certainly like, yeah, every week. I totally think that you should. I think it's like imperative. I think it's also like, a good way to start like creating your network as well. I think it's like nice to, it's a good way to like start seeing the editors that you like and you don't.
And I mean, creating a network, that's the whole point of like writing a good pitch, having a good relationship as you're writing. So like, what are you looking for in like creating that relationship with a writer? Like what is, I go, what is a thing where you're like, well, I'm not going to probably work with that person again. Or this was a great situation. I just want to like keep them in my back pocket for whatever it may be.
Yeah. I think it's when the writer knows that this is a team. Like that me working with them is like a huge team sport. Like I think journalism, oftentimes we think of, the lowly writer like sitting alone behind their computer or whatever. But I think that ultimately like it is these stories, like they don't happen, just by yourself. Like it really happens with a team of people, especially like when you're sort of a writer and you're working with an editor. So I think that is like the biggest thing. If you're willing to sort of work, be like super collaborative in the process, I think that is like the biggest thing that I feel is like imperative to like having a really good working relationship. And also honestly, like the other biggest thing is being really, really honest with your boundaries. Like I think it's like, okay, if you don't like an edit that an editor has made, tell them and explain why, and explain like why, a certain like thing that they're asking for doesn't really make sense here. Like, I think that the more information, the better. And that to me is like the sign of a really good working relationship.
Yeah, I think that is definitely true and the healthiest version of a good working relationship. I think if we're working together quickly and you don't need to fight over every edit, like it's not making the piece wrong, it's good not to do that if you don't need to. If the piece is wrong, of course, you should absolutely push back. And overall, you should work with somebody who like respects your voice and the kind of like story you want to tell, while also you in return trust them and understand that they know what works for the magazine. There's a push and pull there. There are people on both sides of it. There are writers who I would work with again, even though I would fairly characterize the experience as a little bit of a nightmare. And other people who like are super easy to the point where I'm worried that they aren't looking at what I do to their work. Like something in the middle is totally fine. You'll kind of figure out what kind of person you are. Maybe you already know. You're allowed to be human too, but the easier it is for both of us, the better generally, especially if it's something quick. If it's a longer feature, then there's more room to go back and forth a million times.
So we're going to open it up to questions. So raise your hand if you have questions. But I'm going to ask one quick one is, so a lot of people ask me, is there a best day to pitch someone? And I think no, but maybe there is.
I don't think so. I get pitches all day, every day. It's all good. Just keep doing it.
If one of you guys want to study my inbox to see how often I respond, I would likely release it to you for a month. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's like Tuesday at 9 or like Wednesday at 3. I'm like,
no,
I don't think it matters.
There's truly no science to it. Not to me. Like,
maybe if Tuesday, if I stayed late that day. I don't know. Unfortunately.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, my name is India Rice. I'm in the Reporting the Nation track. And my question is, when reviewing like op-ed pieces or opinion pieces, what makes someone's opinion like succinct and I don't want to say important. I feel like important is like a bad word to use. But what makes it a good opinion versus just somebody rambling about something that they think is important?
That's such a good question because there are so many people that are rambling in opinion pieces. I think that oftentimes it's if it is backed up by research and it is backed up by fact and it is like explaining something that can tell us more broadly about what like is going on within our world today, or what sort of zooming in to zoom out in a sense. Like, and I do think that it is important. Not, of course, everyone's story and opinion is very important. I don't discount that, but I think if we can fold in research and if we can fold in different studies, I think that makes the op-ed truly shine. Think about the way that you talk to your parents, or you want to bring in or someone that doesn't agree with you, you're bringing all your armor, you know what I mean? And that's kind of, I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I think that the thing that I look for is that something about something that other people don't know. You took a class, whatever it is, for whatever reason that you know something more about that and you care about it more than the average person, you're more likely to have something interesting to say about it, whatever direction that may be. It could be political, it could be just a funny cultural argument where you have a different opinion about a certain, I don't know, what's the TV show now? Game of Thrones, not anymore. Whatever show people are watching, if you have a funny argument about a character and something people don't understand about that person's background, that helps inform the way you should watch the character, something. Those are the kinds of things that I look for. And something I'm not going to read the exact same thing on every tweet or New York Times headline I read. Something genuinely additive and surprising is always nice.
Thank you.
Look for the camera. Hi, my name is Autumn. I wanted to inquire about, in your experience, is there ever a chance that maybe someone is hosting a podcast or something, but then they want to pitch a story to a editorial component to you? Has that ever happened to you before? And just gonna throw out some names. Wesley Morris, is coming out with that new podcast, wants to write on Slate or Time about whatever the podcast is about, but in an editorial fashion. Can you speak to that, or have you, in your experience, had that happen, or would you prefer not to? Or are there things that need to be known?
No, you're asking the right person. I know. Well, Tom does a lot of podcasts too, don't you notice?
Not really, actually. So.
Well, you're asking the right person then, because Slate does a million podcasts. I'm totally down for that. I do not want you to write a description of what your podcast is about, but if you take some component of it and expand on it in a way that should be in print, we've had one of my staff writers collaborated with a woman who hosts a podcast for Slate on a This American Life that we then adapted to an article, and the article was huge. The episode was huge. It was an amazing all-around thing, but they adapted it. They turned it into something that made sense in a different medium. But that kind of thing where you have expertise and it doesn't sound like everybody would want that, but we're down, and a lot of places probably would be.
Yeah, I think we definitely work with people who do have podcasts that then translate into a written piece. We just don't have our own. But I think that, if there is a story to be told and it feels like it's in conjunction with whatever other multimedia work that you or whoever else is doing, I don't see why not. I think it's always really fun to have really robust pieces, and whether that creates another component like a podcast or, photos or whatever, that it makes the story even more dynamic. So
in the past, has there do you need permission from the network or the organization that's hosting the podcast, or what are those do's and don'ts?
Good question.
Typically, yes. Yeah. It depends on what it is and the nature of that person's relationship with the writer. NBC can't own your entire knowledge of a subject, even if you did something for them. But if you are planning to use specific reporting that you did exclusively for them, then yes, you probably want to collaborate.
Yeah.
I also think there's sort of a difference between PR and then having
Correct.
an actual story. Or if it's like you're writing, like if you're involved in the podcast, or you're writing like you do a lot of pieces on movies, like you're writing a review of the movie or something. But like also you wouldn't want to just do straight up PR on it.
Hey, my name is Ben Land. I'm also in the Reporting the Nation program. I have a question about Whitney and I once discussed a story idea that I had that could be perceived as promotional for this company that I think just does something that's positive and maybe is lesser known in New York, and kind of getting their, just shining a light on the type of work that they do. So I guess I'm curious, like the line, how you discern like something that is promotional from just something that may be spotlighting, you know, a lesser known brand or company. And then I have a secondary question that's kind of unrelated, but
Let's do the first question.
yeah, first one.
Yeah, how to straddle the line between PR and regular story. I mean, always a question that we have to ask ourselves. And I think, like, certainly it's really about, like, if you're trying to spotlight a certain, you know, company or a person, I think it's often really great in those times to like look at how do they fit into this like bigger landscape of whatever it is that they're doing and whatever like faction that they're in, and really trying to like weave the story there and like seeing what, you know, not poke holes certainly, but like what are the gaps, because nobody's perfect and everybody has like a story to tell that does have twists and turns. And I think it's like, you know, if you're not asking someone to like buy something, like I think it's that is where obviously it, you know, veers into PR and stuff like that. That's just one example of, you know, many. But I think that ultimately it's just like trying to figure out what it is part, like how it can fit into part of this bigger story. What do you think?
Yeah, I basically agree with that. I think just it needs to be an interesting story. So it needs to be more than just this company does something interesting and good, like a layer, a complication, some kind of thing. Like this is not an example of an upstart brand, but we did a piece about OXO, which makes a bunch of kitchen stuff, like and why it is that they're so good at that. And so like all the product recommendation sites like it. And that could have easily devolved, but he found like the writer went to their office and found stuff to like kind of raise his eyebrow at. Just add layers and interesting information. And you know, if you are in touch with them before you're in touch with us, don't make it sound like you're like very cozy with them. That's probably would help for a blind pitch.
I think sometimes it's like there's this. I can't exactly remember. Like you didn't work for the company or anything, no, right?
No, it was the Too Good to Go thing that we were discussing.
That's right. That's right.
Oh,
I get so many like
that.
ideas coming at me. Sometimes I gotta let them go so that my mind can fill back up. That's right. I remember now. Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes if it's just like they're doing such great stuff, like then it's like, what else is the next thing? Or like why are they doing so well? Or like it's like Too Good to Go is like really fun to read about.
It's the perishables company, right?
Yeah.
So like I think if it's like, okay, well, who else is doing that kind of work? Like what are the pitfalls of something like that? What are the climate implications? Because so much of it is about sort of food waste and climate implications. Like what is that? What is the bigger climate story there? Versus like, oh, they're just doing cool work and that's like what we're going to talk about.
Or it's like the person who has spent $5 on dinner for a month because he uses Too Good to Go every day. You know,
totally.
Like you know, like you can see the Grub Street version of that.
Yeah, totally. Consumer friendly is always good. Like if it's just about like something you genuinely like and you have like a good argument for why it's good and are willing to explain why it might not be, kind of what you're saying.
Yeah.
That's great. That's a great angle, almost always.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Julia. I'm in the literary reportage program here. I have a question about pitching. Do you prefer a pitch that teases you a little bit and makes you want to learn more about the story or hear more about the story? Or a pitch that says the most interesting fact or the most interesting statistic or the most interesting thing you found directly in it?
It's a fun question.
Yeah,
I
I
love
don't
it. If you become a headline, if any of you do become editors and write headlines one day, you will learn the value of taking information out of a headline as opposed to leaving it in and making it very clear that something is happening, but you can't know what it is until you're on the story and reading it. But you don't want to overdo that either. I would say it really depends on the story, but probably hint at least at what you have. If you have nothing, like it's not going to help. But like a paragraph is short, so presumably you have more than you'll say, even if you're relatively kind of like nodding at what you're going to do or what you already have.
Yeah, I think the value of the curiosity gap, that's what we call it, is huge. But I think that oftentimes it is nice to, like you said, kind of like hinting at, yeah, what is the thing that you like actually want to talk about. But yeah, love to like be teased into a story. That's great.
Thank you.
I always think about like in local news, it's like, is your kitchen killing you? Right after this break, and then
I'll
it's
read
like,
that right away.
No, it's not. And they come back like, no, it's not.
There's a version that you do where you hide what you're doing a little bit. Be like, I would love to talk to you more about how the story would expand upon this other version that you did that's not as good as mine, without that last part. But yeah, like there's ways to do it.
Hello, my name is Jalinda. I'm in the magazine program. And I was wondering about sort of a situation where someone pitches an idea, it's accepted, and the reporter is starting to do, like, they don't fully have the reporting done yet, and they're finding that it's kind of going in a different direction than the pitch, like, suggested, or there's something more interesting in a different realm of the story. Sort of, how do you deal with that? Does that, like, kill the piece, or, just the pitch and the final product end up being kind of two different things?
Go for it.
It really, it depends. So most of the time, hopefully your information will be complicating it in an interesting way. And most editors like complication. They like it when things aren't what they expected. But if it's like a dramatically different thing that ends up, your idea was to refute a popular idea about something, and in fact you're confirming the popular idea about it, that might be a problem.
Yeah, I would say that is like the pretty much exactly what I would say. I mean, I think it's also like important to be transparent about that in the pitch of like what you're trying to explore and like, what you're sort of maybe even unsure about as we begin the work of the piece, because of course it can, like, that's life, it can veer in different directions and things like that. But once it starts sort of veering completely off the rails, like it can it can certainly like not be the thing that we bargained for.
My name's Amanda. I'm in the Reporting the Nation program as well. And I was wondering how, because I have like a lot of ideas, right? But a lot of them have to do with like my personal life, identity, and things like that. So have you ever been in a situation where you had to kind of like sit down with someone and be like, maybe like this piece is too personal? And like, what do you do in that like scenario?
If it's too personal and you feel uncomfortable to talk about it?
Like maybe it would depend. Maybe some things I'm comfortable talking about and other things I'm not. But like, how do you kind of like work with like sensitive like topics and all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, from my standpoint, it's all within your comfortability of like, to make sure that like you feel the safest that you feel in telling, if it's a personal story, your personal story. But then I think, of course, like it can't just be like, this happened to me and that's the story. Like it has to then zoom out into the other questions that you're trying to ask of what it means, in the sort of grander scheme of things. That is often how, like, I hope I'm answering your question.
No, you did.
Okay. Okay, good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that, like, I don't know if this is what you meant, but like an example, and I'm not picking any colleges because I think they're all amazing there, but there's been a genre of personal essays on the cut lately where there's a question of whether or not the personal essays are inviting a certain kind of reaction to the writer and the editors aren't doing enough to protect them from that. I think that I always try to I don't think that that's totally fair for most of them. I think they're great at the cut. I'm not insulting them. In fact, they're evil practitioners of that stuff. It's hard to do well and they do a great job. I'm just saying if that's kind of getting at what you mean, I like to talk to a writer and make sure that they know that if they do put themselves out there, you don't control who responds to you. We have certain levers to pull. We can like delete you from the internet and we can do things like that, but we can't stop people from being awful. So if you want to go there, you have to, I just try to make sure people understand that. I never would feel like a writer's getting too personal with me as long as they, understand the repercussions of putting so much of themselves out there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. This is David Dent, the director of reporting, New York Reporting the Nation.
Okay, I might not need this, but this is kind of an old question that you probably answered before, but it's an old question where the answer, I think, changes in generations, and perhaps. So let's say someone pitches a piece to you, and they haven't heard from you in a week or two. If they continue not to hear, should they move on to someone else in terms of, in particular, if they think it's a story with a currency that might be lost if they don't. I know there used to be a case where people did not pitch to 2 or 3 places at a time, that you should only do one. But has that rule kind of changed in the business? And how do you suggest freelancers navigate that?
Yeah, I think it's all about just being as transparent as possible. And I think, like pitching to as many people just in this current landscape is like totally fine and totally kosher. I think it's like if you feel that the subject is particularly, important in this current moment, and you want to like move on and withdraw your submission, I think it is just like, transparent, like just to be transparent, like with the editor that you are working with, basically.
So, let's say you don't have a relationship with the editor, but you pitched. And let's say, should the writer say to you, to the editor they pitched, I'm going to move on and pitch this to many other people now, or to another place now since I haven't heard from you? Or should they just do that? Or what do you suggest?
Yeah, I'm curious to hear what you think, but I would just say to, I'm withdrawing. Like, I think that is totally fine, totally within your right as well.
Yeah, you don't even have, if you decided the person is saying no by not responding to you, or at least not responding to you in a way that you're going to get a yes, you don't have to do anything. It's like, you can write again if you want, but it probably will get missed. But specifically, one thing we didn't address before is what happens when one editor or publication doesn't respond, and then you might want to take it to another. You can totally do that if they don't respond. If they say no, don't do that, because they will find out and probably kill your piece. Or maybe they won't be vindictive, but it's often, without going too much into it, I notice that this happens a lot to female editors. Like, they'll say no, and then someone will pitch another editor who they think might respond to them more. It's like not a good thing. It ends up being a negative conversation. So if someone says no to you, move on. If no one says no to you, it's okay to try another person at the same publication, is my rule for that.
I've had students who pitched an editor. The editor did not write. Then they found out, like, they've heard from a friend of a friend who was like, you should pitch this other editor at the same publication. And I was like, okay, like, maybe what you do is pitch the new editor, and copy the other one, and just be like, I'm just copying the original Jeffrey. I'm just copying Jeffrey because I originally sent this to him, but my friend or whatever, and my professor suggested I actually write to you, Rachel. And so then you both understand, like, you're at the same publication. Like, you both understand that, like, it's just transparency, right? But yeah, like, I've had that happen too, where I'm like, because it always comes up. Like, you're like, I'm looking at this piece, and someone's like, oh, they pitched me, and I already said no.
Yeah, totally. What will happen in that situation if they didn't say no is they will immediately Slack the other editor on the email and say, I like this idea, why didn't you take it? And probably that other editor will say, oh, I just didn't see it. So it's okay. Don't worry about taking a little risk. The worst you'll get is a slightly terse email in response.
Hi, I'm Cara. I'm in the undergraduate program for journalism. And my question is, do you have any advice for freelancers who want to maintain a good relationship with an editor? Like after you pitch and after you get your article published, how do you maintain a familiarity with the editor?
I think certainly like meeting, trying to like, create a more personal relationship is always really nice. Like I love to get to know my writers and have like really long relationships with them. So like inviting them, like to coffee to just get to know them a little bit more, or even like, like think about, oh, what are they up to? Or even if you liked a piece that they recently like put out, like say, oh, I really, really like this. Like everyone is willing to take a compliment. Like, we love those. And so I think that is like always a really nice thing. And just like being, personable and if as you have other ideas, like feel free to like always reach out, even if like it takes a little bit of time to respond. I think that is.
Yeah, and I would say, especially when you're newer, if you successfully place a piece, keep pitching good ideas in that vein or something that was similar. Maybe don't send every single idea you have thinking that you have an in with that person, because the first pitch probably has something specific that they saw and were looking for. I've had some writers that I burned out on quick just because it seemed like every pitch that they had, they were like, oh, I know this person now, and they sent everything, even if it wasn't a great fit for us. And that's, normal, just trying to get your pieces bought, but that would maybe one thing to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
But pitch ideas in a similar, whatever or you can even ask them after you publish, like how it went, what they think about the idea, what else they're looking for, other ways like that.
Sometimes students ask me if they have a pitch, like do they, like they have another idea and they're like in the middle of working with you. They're like, should I pitch my idea now? And I'm like, maybe just wait a bit. Like wait till it's your other pieces out and then pitch. But because you don't want to throw spaghetti at the wall, I guess.
Yes, I often find that it's great one pitch at a time, like is always the best thing to do, because oftentimes, we're working with so many different people, and so it's all about also like scheduling on our end. Honestly, it comes down to that too, like figuring out like, oh, when can we find time to work on this piece? Like when can we find time to work on like all the other things on top of like looking at the news, on top of like ideating for the news as well.
Did you have a follow-up question? I'm sorry. Yeah.
I was going to ask, is there a realistic or maybe, I'm curious if this ever happens where a multi-time freelancer, say, sound writer,
Oh yeah, for sure. That's a great way to get those jobs, is to show what you can do, write for an editor, show that you can meet deadlines, and also just have the kind of ideas the publication wants. I've had, hiring someone as a contributor basically means that you pay them like $2,500 a month to contribute a certain amount, right? It's a much easier yes for an editor to do that. It of course is less security for you. It doesn't involve health insurance. It's not that much money in the end. Like you need more money than just that, but it's a way you can get in. And I've had a good stable of people like that who have like, some of them are writing novels, but need a little bit of money on the, that kind of thing. If you're not a person who's looking for a full-time staff writer job, that's a great path. And then for, we hire staff writers. Like one of our most prolific is a guy named Luke Winkie, who was a freelancer for 10 years, and we had him on contract and we loved his stuff. And he like wouldn't let us hire him actually because he was having so much fun freelancing. But we finally did like a year ago, and it's been great. So it's definitely a path that works if you can make that work for yourself financially, which I know can be hard.
So the contract position, you're looking for someone, are you looking for someone who has a certain beat? Or like, how does it go from like a frequent contributor, a frequent freelancer or whatever to a contributor?
Yeah, I'm curious how it is at time, but for us, it depends on the person. Yes, we have columnists that write about politics, and their job is to like have something to say about whatever nightmare is happening in Washington. But then we also have other people like there's this woman, Imogen West Knights, who's like beat is, I guess, that she lives in Europe. Like she's a British woman, but she like basically writes about all kind of weird political happenings there, and also writes about books for us. And she's a novelist. We're talking about bringing her on staff. Don't tell anyone. I guess I just told all of you. No, she knows. We've talked to her. It's just it's hard when someone's not a U.S. citizen. But like that's more of a person that we just like. She's a great writer. And so we liked putting her on stuff. She went on the Gone Girl cruise. You guys know what Gone Girl the book is, probably? There was a cruise that was themed on Gone Girl. Anyway, go look it up.
In what way? Oh my God.
Well, in ways that you can only imagine. It's a long form feature on Slate now. Go read it.
I want to be Imogen. Yeah, I mean, I think that is definitely like always like such a great path to like, yeah, I think. Sorry, the question was about sort of columnists and finding a beat.
Well, it's like, how do you become a staff writer? But
Yeah.
like there is the in-between of like, how do you become a regular contributor who's on a
Yeah.
contract, I guess.
I think
Paid
often,
monthly.
yeah, I think one, it is a really great path. I think it's also a great path in finding like what it is that you actually want to write about when you're first starting out. Like, what is your beat? What are the communities that you know and that you like feel like you've sort of embedded yourself in and are most interested in, and then you can like try stuff out. I think certainly when you're first starting out, that like kind of experience is paramount. And then I think it's really nice when people have something that they are an expert in. I think that is like a huge thing. And also when they come with sort of like the sources that would require for you to do the reporting that you need to do.
Any other questions?
How do you become an editor?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had a very linear answer to that. It was just that I was just working there for a long time, and I kind of was always interested in editing. And when you kind of start out, one of the things I always tell people is to be willing to do things that are not necessarily exactly what you would envision at the beginning of your journalism career, just for a little bit of time to like get in somewhere and meet some people, and like you get a salary and whatever. And I did a lot of that at Slate. And then I was there long enough and showed that I had like the right sort of perspective and approach to the work. And even when you don't edit like long articles, they know that you're competent with headlines and such. And that was just the kind of path that I did. The other one I see sometimes at Slate is just that people start really low, like assistant editors, where a lot of what you're doing is helping process copy and things like that, and then you grow from that. But usually it starts at an entry-level place that's not exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah, and then I think you're sort of, yeah, exactly, like what you said, like I think it's like you're willing to try different things, and you're willing to get this sort of a lay of the land of like not just the sort of magazine that you're, or publication or newspaper that you're working at, but also like the lay of the media landscape. Like you're reading all the time, you're finding gaps that like, you're finding good writers. Like the biggest thing about being an editor is actually like reading voraciously and also like finding like great writers that you can work with like day in and day out. So I think that is like a really big part of it. And then, yeah, I think learning as much as you can by osmosis, and also like honestly asking for the things that you want. Like I think that is like the biggest thing too, is like you might have started in a certain place, like you might have started as an editorial assistant or an associate editor or whatever the case may be, and then like you never know where life leads you. Like you never know where you'll kind of end up at the end of it.
And a lot of times the associate editors or whatever it may be they're doing fact checking, which I know fact checking is like there aren't fact checkers as much, but like sometimes the assistant is like doing production work and doing fact checking, and then you also like contribute ideas, and then all of a sudden you're like have these three things that you're doing that is what an editor is doing to a certain extent.
Right.
Do you guys have fact checkers? Yeah.
Certainly, you guys are in print, so they have to.
Yeah.
It'd be much worse for them to get a fact wrong than for us, because we're online and we can fix it instantly. Whereas in print, you can get really screwed if you screw something up big.
Yes.
That's just the legal perspective.
No. Yes, you're exactly right.
Go ahead. Okay, cool. Kind of like a follow-up question on something you just brought up about fact checkers. Is this on? Okay. Do you at all hire freelance fact checkers, like if they have experience in that, and how would someone go about doing that?
I know there are certain publications that certainly do. I know there are certain, like book publishing companies that certainly also do that. They always, I think a lot of people are always looking, especially as like media organizations are like contracting and getting smaller. Like they are using freelance copy editors and fact checkers all the time. And so I think like the biggest thing, I would look out for like different fact checker and copy editor positions. I know that that's feels a little obvious, but I think that is like one of the biggest things. And then of course, like as you start to get to know certain people, I think you can also let them know, like I'm looking not just for freelance writing, but I'm also a fact checker and I'm also a copy editor. Oftentimes that comes with a test anyway to make sure that you are, that you can do the work. But that's really naturally kind of how that goes.
Yeah, we don't really do that. We have copy editors and we have editors that are responsible for the facts of their writers. But I will say, a lot of the jobs I was rejected from at the beginning were things like that. New York Mag does that. I almost got a job at Wired, but at the last minute, I missed the woman's email. It's such a nightmare story. But it was for a fellowship for a year doing that. That's a really good way to start your career. Lots of people do that.
Hi, my name is Leila and I'm still in the job program here. I just want to know, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your estimation for foreign journalists to write about foreign issues that are inside related to Africa? Like, I've spoken with this maybe like when I'm in Africa. I have like a story like something going on that I think I want to write about in my country and take it like international. Let's say, for example, I've tried it a lot. There were like FGM issues, and I've pitched to a lot of like US institutions. I've never been successful on this, and I just want to know, like, do you consider foreign journalists who write on foreign issues? Let's say, for example, I'm in the US now. I'm a journalist student, and I've tried reporting on stories about the US, but I'm kind of like a little bit constrained due to like maybe um, language or some other things. So it's like I made the switch to focus on African issues. Let's say African immigrants in the US or African Americans in the US and their relations to politics or something. Like, in as much as it's centered on Africans, like, do you consider this or what?
We consider it all the time at times, certainly. Like we do a lot of international reporting. I think, we also do a lot about sort of diaspora cultures in the US. That is certainly something that we are always interested in. I think the big sort of challenge and questions that I would ask myself if I were you is like, what is the small sort of story that I can tell in order to tell about the greater issues that are, part of like the conversations that are happening. So kind of what you said, if it's about immigration, like is there a certain person that you can sort of follow that story or something like that. But yeah, certainly I think that is like something that we pay attention to. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, candidly, we're much, much weaker in this area than we used to be, just because we had editors leave who were really focused on international stuff, and they were replaced with people who were focused on something else. Often our hiring goes by, pitch us an idea of who you are and what you would do here as an editor. And right now, we do not have the person who's amazing at international stuff, but we do accept stories totally. We have one coming on the challenges of OnlyFans creators in certain African countries and things like that. Someone comes in with an idea that feels like something that we're familiar with, but wow, it must be much different, a different culture. It's worth us publishing for mostly US-based readers. We totally do. I understand, though, I get tons of pitches from international freelancers, and a lot of it is not quite right for a general interest magazine, like very specific stories about the politics of India, things like that. It's just a little tougher for us, but you can break through if you find the right story, the right way to get in there.
Yeah, and I think it's also about like exactly, it's like about the sort of publication and like who is sort of, looking for things that are more, US based, and then like other places that are, like have a more international interest. I think there are certainly like a lot of, different people that can do that.
Any last question? All right. Thank you both. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys.